Upload. Get yourself on the BBC.
BBC Radio Mersyside.
Time now for our Upload of the Week. BBC Upload is your chance to get your work heard on the BBC, be it a play, a podcast, a poem, a comedy sketch, a song, whatever it is. If it's creative, we want it. Head to bbc.co.uk/upload to find out how to get sending it in. Well, this week's uploader is Laurence Sandman, who submitted a beautiful short story for us, and our Nikki has read it on his behalf, and this is called Sinking.
He sat, cross-legged, silent and still, at the edge of the path, staring at the shallow depression in the surface of the ground just a few feet in front of him. Head bowed, the occasional tear would fall onto the hands resting in his lap. Without knowing it, the fingers on his right hand rotated the wedding ring on the other hand, round and round, round and round, like some miniature prayer wheel spinning its supplications to the heavens above. He sat like this for a long time. The sun sank lower in the sky, the air around him grew cooler, and still he sat, thinking, remembering, weeping. Just a few hours earlier, he had been walking down this same path with his wife, the woman he had fallen madly in love with and married over 30 years ago. They had held hands and chatted idly as they strolled along, not going anywhere in particular, just enjoying the peace, the view, and the companionship. Now he sat here alone and wondered how such things could happen on a day like this. He hadn't even noticed at first. Maybe there had been a slight hesitancy in her gait. Had she said anything? He didn't think so. But then she had stopped and taken her hand from his, placing both hands on her hips as she tried to figure out what was going on. She was looking at her feet, and his gaze followed. The path they were on was sand, just a few feet wide, and bordered on both sides by the type of grass that grows near the beach, hardy, but not the nicest to walk on, so they had kept to the path. He looked to see what was causing the problem. He frowned as he realised that, where he expected to see sandals, there were now simply 2 ankles emerging out of the damp ground. The sandals were completely covered. "What the?" he said out loud, and looked up to her face to be met with a look of astonishment and bewilderment. He held out his hand to her, saying, "Come on, I'll give you a pull." She grasped it, and she gently pulled her towards him. "Try to put one foot over here at the side of the path," he suggested. Nothing. He could see that she was trying to lift first one foot and then the other, but neither was moving. They looked at each other again. Frowns had replaced the previous expressions and a tiniest hint of concern. He pulled again, a little more firmly this time. "I'm stuck." "I can see that. Don't try and keep the sandals on. We can always get another pair," he suggested. "Leave them behind and lift your feet out one by one." Once again he pulled. He could see the muscles in her legs. She always had great legs. A legacy of many hours in the swimming pool as a youngster, flexing and tensing, but there was zero movement. "They won't move," she said emphatically. "They're stuck. It must be some sort of sinking sand." He let go of her hand and stood up, bemused. "Sinking sand? Here? I don't believe it." "Well, it's sand and I'm sinking, so that seems pretty conclusive to me. Just make sure you don't come too close and get stuck yourself, or we'll never get out." He looked once more at the point where her ankles, calves, protruded from the sand. "This is serious. You've sunk even more, and I think you're still sinking. Stand still and don't move. I'll see if I can go and get help." "Well, I'm not going anywhere, that's for certain. Hurry up if you're going." He looked up and down the path, trying to decide which way offered the best chance of meeting anybody who might help. "Well, I thought you were going to get help. Don't just stand there like a stuffed dummy." The tone was angry, but tinged with anxiety. He made up his mind and raced away up the track in the direction from which they had originally come. Logic suggested that they had made it thus far without problems, and meeting another patch of quicksand while he was alone was therefore pretty unlikely. He also knew how far they had walked after parking the car, There was bound to be someone else in the car park and he would simply get them to help. Easy. No need to panic. But he ran as fast as he could nevertheless. After what seemed like hours, but in reality was probably just minutes, he reached the car park. Nobody. Not another car in sight. He scanned the horizon for signs of another car, a house, people. Nothing. And he knew that the main road was miles away. Tow rope! There's a tow rope in the boot. For one sickening moment he imagined that he had left the keys in the bag with his wife. He slapped his pockets and felt the welcoming hardness of the bunch of keys. Pulling them out, he unlocked the boot and started searching desperately for the rope. It's not here! It's not here! Where the... He was actually shouting the words out loud, but they trailed away as he remembered that he had taken the rope out the previous day to pack the luggage. And he could see it clearly in his mind's eye. Left it on the floor of the garage. He wasn't the type of person to swear, usually, but this wasn't a usual sort of day, and a stream of expletives trailed through the air behind him as he started to race back. He had to check that she was still okay, then he would reassure her and go and get help in the car. No problem. They would be back in the hotel by supper, regaling everyone with their adventures. Only, a little voice was whispering that this wasn't going to end well. This was no famous 5 jolly romp to be followed by toasted crumpets by the fire and hot chocolate. This was a serious problem, and that thought made him run faster. He wasn't sure how far it was back. The path seemed to go on forever, but mercifully, there were no side forks along the way, just a single meandering path. It couldn't be far now. As he came over the brow of a hill, he seemed to recognise that he was close. Still running as fast as his tired legs would carry him, he peered ahead, straining to see her figure along the path. He couldn't see her. For a moment he imagined that she had managed to pull herself out and was sitting at the side of the path, cursing him for taking so long and bemoaning the loss of a perfectly pair of good sandals. The alternative surfaced for a moment in his imagination, but he immediately dismissed it. But there was still no sign of her. And he must be nearly. He stopped abruptly. His heart stopped too. A few more yards, and he would have run the risk of actually kicking her in the head. For that, a short distance in front of him, was all that he could see of her. No legs, no trunk, no arms, just her head sticking incongruously out of the ground, as if it had been severed from her body. The shock froze him for a few seconds. But then he leapt forward and crouched down beside her and reached out to gently touch her hair, softly saying her name and yet fearing there might be no reply. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked up at him. He asked, "What happened? Are you okay?" Her face bore a look of pained resignation. "I just kept sinking," she whispered. "The more I tried to get myself out, the faster it seemed to go down." "I'll go and get help," he started to say, but she interrupted him, saying, "No, stay here with me." She began to cry, and through the sobs stammered, "There's nothing we can do." He jumped to his feet as if physically rejecting the idea and was about to argue with her when she managed to move her head to look up at him, and with an obviously enormous effort told him firmly to stop and sit down. "I just want you to stay here and be with me." She closed her eyes and grimaced as tears continued to roll down her cheeks. He sat down silently and reached out a hand to gently stroke the side of her head, and his tears too began to flow. "That's nice. Don't stop," she said, and he kept going. With dismay, he saw that she was continuing to sink. The sand was already up to her chin. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. I should have got you out straight away," he whispered. But she didn't answer. Her face had softened, the tears had stopped, and with a physical stab of pain in his heart, he realised that she was gone. The pressure of the sand had made breathing impossible, and she had simply stopped living. He altered his position so he could reach out with both hands to cradle her head, and, as gently as if she were asleep and not wanting to wake her, he kissed the top of her head, as she slowly, gradually, sank below the surface. She was gone, and he just sat, cross-legged, silent and still, at the edge of the path, staring at the shallow depression in the surface of the ground just a few feet in front of him.
Upload. Get yourself on the BBC. Go to bbc.co.uk/upload and upload your content now.
BBC Radio Mersyside.
Laurence, welcome to the show. Thank you for your upload this evening. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Laurence. I was born in Chester. Grew up in Chester until about 11. Did a bit of time in Surrey, going to school down there, back up to Chester. And then met Brenda in 1977, who is the subject of the piece.
And what a lovely piece it is. And it's called Sinking. Lovely short story that we've just heard then. So is this your first bit of writing? I mean, it doesn't sound like first work material. Have you always written?
I remember looking back and writing little bits, and they seem to come in sort of bursts of inspiration. But the problem was when looking after Brenda, I found that I needed some way of just getting my feelings out there. And I was really struggling. Sometimes I would put on a film that I knew was going to make me cry, simply to cry. I know it sounds weird, but when you're that overwhelmed with what's going on, it's quite difficult. And then one night I just sat down, I think Brenda was in bed asleep, and I just started writing, and the tears poured out to me. Aww. They literally poured out to me. I mean, and by the end of it, it had been quite cathartic, and I really felt much better after I'd done it. And then I shared it with friends, and they seemed to understand, because I think part of it was just trying to get across to people in this sort of strange way just what it's like when you see the person you're madly in love with just literally disappearing before your eyes, and not being able to do anything about it. So a lot of it is based on real events. The spinning of the ring, that was something that I found Brenda did when she was really upset once, and she was crying, and the tears were landing on her hand, and the ring was going round and round. So there are lots of things that I sort of just dragged in from my memories and built into the story. And it made a huge difference to me. And then as things went on, because Brenda was diagnosed in 2000. She was only 51 when she was diagnosed, which was really young. And I think, looking back, I think she knew that something was wrong. But she's a good Liverpool lass. and as she used to tell me, you can tell a Liverpool lass, but you can't tell her much. And
you can't tell them what to do either.
No, exactly. And that was exactly, but she would just get her down and get on with it. But yeah, we got the diagnosis in 2000. And then she passed away in 2015. So it was a long time just seeing her slowly fade away.
Yeah.
And Alzheimer's, like it's. I mean, every disease like that has got its horrible side. But in this case, she was just disappearing. The only thing you can say is that after a while, I don't think she really knew what was going on. Mm-hmm. So she didn't get too upset about it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it also meant that we couldn't communicate anymore. So that was difficult. But writing seemed to help. And so the various aspects of struggling to cope ended up in different stories and different poems and things like that.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about what you went through, what Brenda went through. It's, it's heartbreaking listening to you, but it's lovely that you did find a way to cope through creativity in the likes of the story that you wrote. Like you mentioned there, Brenda was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2000, sadly passed away in 2015. But what I love about your story is it's the metaphor of the sinking sand, because you don't even mention the word Alzheimer's in the story, do you? You do it in such a clever way. Yeah, I just think it's brilliant.
Oh, thank you. I know people that have read it they've said that they can get a little bit of what it was like, which was, I guess, partly was to get my feelings out there and partly to try and help people So if it achieves that, I'm more than happy.
Yeah. Putting a different perspective on it and a different spin on it, and making people see it in a way of, wow, it is like that when you're watching somebody slowly fade away in front of you. It is, and you feel helpless. Well, it was very beautifully written. You've just mentioned there that some of your friends have read it and they enjoyed it and stuff too. So is that what you want people to take from your writing, that they're not alone and you've gone through this as well?
I think the biggest thing is that, yes, you realise that the situation you're in is paralleled in the lives of so many people. I mean, the army of carers across the country and across the world is huge. And sadly, some of them are very young. You hear of youngsters, teenagers, having to perform really adult duties looking after their parents. But any carer is in a similar situation, no matter what the person that they're caring for, no matter what they're struggling with, they share a lot of these same issues. So I think part of it is just knowing that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who feels like this. Because, sometimes you feel guilty, sometimes you feel that you're not doing enough. There's a whole pile of stuff that comes in.
Yeah.
So I think that helps. Certainly, if somebody else had written this and I'd read it, I'd have been crying my eyes out and saying, yes, that's exactly
how I feel. You've been able to articulate it. Well, I'm sure there's lots of people that have listened tonight and gone, that's exactly how I would have put it if I could articulate it, and you will have helped you. You definitely will have helped. Would Brendan have loved to hear you on the radio, Laurence?
She would. She was the one that introduced me to Radio Mersyside.
Did she?
Music. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
She really was a good Liverpool lass then, wasn't she, eh?
She was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, do you have any other little stories that you're working on at the moment? You still do it?
I'm every now and then something comes to mind, and a lot of them. Well, as during the period from when I wrote Sinking up to when Brenda passed away, I sat at her bedside the night before she died, and wrote another piece, and it was all about how I felt about that, not knowing whether she was going to make it the next day. But then I just carried on after that, and situations that I come across in my own life, it triggers a story. I wrote one about the battle, which was basically, and a lot of carers will understand this, when you're trying to persuade your loved one to take the medication or do the things that she should be doing for her own good, and it turns into a battleground. And so there's a story about this battle that goes on. But I even wrote one about James Bond, because I thought, well, James Bond, he's a very good super spy, but he's not invincible. What happened? What would happen if he ended up with dementia?
Yeah.
And so I wrote a story about that. And but yeah, they keep on coming.
Well, keep on sending them to us. Keep on sending them to us, because I loved when this popped up in the upload inbox and I read it and I thought, oh wow, that's brilliant. I've got to get Laurence on. I've got to have a chat with him about it. So keep uploading. What was it about uploads that made you think, you know what, I will send it in?
I think, I became aware of it, to be honest. I did submit a story this is donkeys years ago. I submitted a story to Radio Mersyside. I think there was a weekly programme where a story would be read out, and it was about little Lego figures, which had an allegory in the real world, but that, as far as I knew, didn't exist anymore. So I kept on thinking it'd be really good to share this. And then one day I spotted this, I think it was on the Radio Mersyside Facebook page. I thought, oh, wait a minute. I'll just try. There's no harm in sending it in and just see what people think. So it's nice that it A, reached you, and B, that you liked it. That's very nice.
Definitely reached me, and I definitely liked it. So thank you so much, and continue to send in your work to us as well. That's what Upload is for, and I'm sure you'll have inspired other people to upload as well, because we get a whole host of different types of people and creative work on here, and you don't know what's going to touch somebody or inspire somebody. So thank you for your story, and thank you for being our uploader of the week.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for giving us the ring.
Upload. BBC.